Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised.
When it comes to our sex lives, and I think most of the people listening to this podcast, when we are looking to fix something, we're looking at what it is that we can do to fix it. And a lot of times we kind of gloss over the sacramental side of how healing and rejuvenating the sacraments that God has bestowed upon us really are. So today we're going to be talking about particularly the sacramental power of the Eucharist and confession and how those make a huge difference in your sex life and can transform literally everything. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, the sex and intimacy podcast for Catholic women. My name is Ellen Holloway. I am a Catholic speaker and coach who specializes in sex and marital intimacy, and I am on a mission to help you actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with your spouse. Look, it's the human condition to want to fix things. I mean, this is how I run my life. Something's going wrong. Okay, what can I do to fix it? And recently, I was, during my prayer time, reading through a chapter in The Imitation of Christ, which is an incredible book. I have probably been reading it for the past year and a half, just tiny little snippets at a time. It's not a huge book. I've just been reading it very, very slowly. It is by Thomas A. Kempis. Probably. There's a little bit of debate on who exactly wrote The Imitation of Christ, but it is an excellent spiritual reading. This is from Book 4, Chapter 4. And this chapter is on the sacrament of the Eucharist. And this couple of sentences just really popped out to me the other day. And I realized that I needed to bring this into a podcast episode and just talk about the healing powers of the Eucharist when it comes to issues of sex and marital intimacy. So here's the quote. "This most exalted and worthy sacrament is the health of both soul and body, the remedy for every spiritual sickness. By it, all vices are cured, passions restrained, temptations overcome or diminished. By it, grace is poured forth, confirming faith, strengthening hope, inflaming and enlarging charity." I mean, that's just incredible. And I think a lot of times, I myself included, I just gloss over the power of the sacrament of the sacrament, right? The body of Christ that we get to receive. Like, it heals everything. But we have to let it. God is not a tyrant. He doesn't just rip open our lives and take things. We have to let him in. We have to open up to him. And so, when it comes to receiving the Eucharist, we can absolutely receive the Eucharist without being open to the healing spiritual graces that are present in the Eucharist. And I want to kind of repeat a couple of things here that are particularly important for sex and marital intimacy. By it, all vices are cured. If you or your spouse are struggling with a vice related to sex and intimacy, be it pornography or maybe something a little bit less intense than pornography, whatever vice that you're dealing with, frequent the sacrament of the Eucharist. Because God tells us he will heal us. And yes, continue to work on it, on yourself and, your mindset and, don't just sit passively. But that's not what frequenting the sacrament of the Eucharist is. That's not a passive thing. That is an active thing. Actively going to Mass regularly, having that be your intention for Mass, going up to receive Jesus in the Eucharist receive his body, soul, blood, and divinity in the Eucharist is not passive. That is not passive. And going up to him and saying, I am receiving this so that you can heal me of this specific vice that I am dealing with. By it, all passions are restrained, temptations overcome or diminished. I hear from so many of you of just difficulty in your marriages, of, differing levels of passion and there being temptation around, maybe we're trying to avoid pregnancy right now, which means that we need to abstain for this 2 to 3 week period. And there being a lot of temptation around that. Frequent the sacrament of the Eucharist because God will heal that temptation. He will help you transform that temptation into the beautiful gift that sexual desire really is. And he will help you point that desire toward him, because that's ultimately what sexual desire is. Sexual desire is a desire for God and a desire for communion with God. And our marriages and sex are like this tiny little window to help us see the greater glory of heaven that awaits us and the communion that awaits us with the Trinity in heaven. And so that sexual desire and that temptation that we have, if we're avoiding pregnancy or abstaining for some reason, whatever that reason is, that desire is so good, and God can absolutely open up to us the true meaning behind that desire. And the key to opening that up is the sacrament of the Eucharist, is going to Mass and receiving Jesus Christ. All right, by it, grace is poured forth, right? I think we could all use a little bit more grace in every aspect of our life, but especially in our marriages. It confirms faith, strengthens hope, and inflames and enlarges charity. Now, the way that the Catechism actually defines charity is love. Like, these two things are basically interchangeable. The virtue of charity is love. So, we're talking about the virtue of love here, and that the Eucharist is going to inflame and enlarge love, which is going to allow us to enter into our marriages in a more full and unifying way, and be able to enter into the sexual act in a more full and unifying way. So this tiny little section of, again, this was from the Imitation of Christ, just got me really fired up about focusing our marriages toward the sacraments. So often we're focusing work in our marriage on human capabilities, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But if we are negating God in healing our marriages, then we're missing something that's actually going to heal it. And so, what I mean is, like, I recommend marriage counseling to, maybe even every single married couple. It is incredible to be able to have a mediator party and be able to work through issues in a marriage counseling setting. That is absolutely incredible. But marriage counseling alone is not going to fix your marriage. It's not going to heal your marriage, because you're only relying at that point on human capability. The sacraments are necessary for your marriage. Your marriage is a sacrament, right? You have incredible graces that are poured into your marriage from the sacrament of matrimony. And if you are not in a sacramental marriage, I want to really encourage you to seek out a sacramental marriage, because there is such grace, such profound grace beyond any comprehension that we have available in a sacramental marriage. And so, seek that out if that's not what you are currently in. But beyond that, I think there are two sacraments that absolutely need to be at the forefront of our marriages. And they will help us to transform any issues that we are dealing with in our marriage overall, but particularly issues of sex and intimacy. And those two sacraments are the sacrament of the Eucharist and confession. We'll be back with the episode in just a minute. Let me ask you a quick question. Does sex just kind of suck? Or maybe you and your husband are just always arguing about sex? Maybe you feel like your libido has disappeared, or it takes you too long to get aroused, or you just really don't like sex that much and you're ready for that to not be an issue in your life anymore. If that sounds like you, then you need the Catholic Sex Course for Women. In this course, we dive into the 5 pillars of married sex, and I help you actually finally have the sex life that you have dreamed of. Sex is so good. It is so holy, and you deserve to actually enjoy and find pleasure in your sex life. Check out the Catholic Sex Course for Women at vinesinfullbloom.com/Catholic sex, or click the link in the show notes. So I talked a lot about the sacrament of Eucharist, but just a little bit more on that, making sure that as husband and wife, you are attending Mass together. And I know that this is much harder for those of you who are in disparity of cult marriages, or maybe your husband or your spouse is no longer practicing Catholic. Encourage your spouse to come with you, even if they are not Catholic. Encourage them to come to Mass with you. Ask, just keep asking, continue to ask. And then when you're at Mass, bring that as an intention that you would like your spouse to join you at Mass, and continue to pray for that. And again, the Eucharist is going to heal it all. And look, in marriage, 2 became 1. So in a way, you are your spouse. And when you receive the Eucharist, your spouse, in a way that we cannot comprehend at all. But when you receive the Eucharist, your spouse receives the Eucharist. So yes, you can play an active role in helping your spouse heal from things, even if your spouse is not coming with you to Mass. Now, the ideal is that you guys are going to Mass together and that you're both receiving the Eucharist. Absolutely. That's going to be much more efficacious. But God works through us, and He works through the situations that we are in. So never diminish the power of prayer and the power of God, particularly through the sacraments. And then a little bit on the sacrament of confession, or the sacrament of reconciliation. This is so huge. And I think sometimes we see the sacrament of reconciliation as, well, I've done something wrong, so now I need to fix it. I've made these mistakes and I need to now just go through this laundry list and check that box and clear the slate. The sacrament of reconciliation is an opportunity to come face to face with our God and receive His mercy and His love and His healing power. It's not necessarily about I've done all these things wrong, and now that this is the way that I fix that. It's, God, I've missed the mark in pursuing you perfectly. And we have all missed the mark in pursuing God perfectly, because we are human, we are fallen, we are never going to pursue God perfectly. Right? So I've missed the mark, Lord. And here are the ways that I've been missing the mark. Here's the things that I've done in my family, or haven't done in my family, or to my spouse or my coworkers, or, right? Your sin is where you have missed the mark. It's not about listing all the things that you've done wrong. It's about asking God to help you get to heaven and become a better human. And so that's why, it's often recommended to receive the sacrament of reconciliation once a month. The Catechism says, as often as is needed. There is literally no bar of limit on how often you can receive the sacrament of reconciliation. If you need to receive it 100 times in one day, you can. There's nothing stopping you. The Catechism does have a limit on the Eucharist. It says three times in a day. No more than that. But the Sacrament of Reconciliation says as often as is needed. And look, we need God's grace every single day. I'm not saying you need to go to confession every single day, but you can if you find a willing priest. That might be kind of difficult. But once a month is an excellent goal to shoot for. And it's something that you can do with your spouse. Obviously, the Sacrament of Reconciliation is an individual sacrament, you and the priest, but like you can go together. And the great thing about going with your spouse, like let's say you go on a Saturday afternoon when most parishes offer confession, you just grab the kids, bring them all along. One of you goes first, the other one watches the kids, and then you trade. And it's great and it works awesome. So I just want to finish this episode. I hope that I have encouraged you to reflect a little bit more deeply on the power of the sacraments and how you might be able to rely on them more in your marriage. If possible, I want to encourage you to go to the Sacrament of Reconciliation once a month. And as far as the sacrament of the Eucharist, Mass, you already go once a week on Sunday, but is there another day per week that you could add in? Especially if you could add in going together with your spouse. Is there an early Mass that you could go to? Or get creative. Is there a lunchtime Mass near where your husband works or where you both work? Is there a evening Mass once a week that you could go to? Like, it doesn't have to be a morning before work Mass. Get creative. It exists. And also look into Saturday Masses. Not all parishes offer like that morning Saturday daily Mass, but there are several parishes that do. That could be a good option if the weekday Masses don't really work because of work schedules, school schedules, etc.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.